My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sangran, Guru Piranyo, fellow Jnanis. We are continuing the discussion today of this very important Upanishad, which is the Katha Upanishad. There are first part 1, chapter 1, which we covered in the last few satsangs on the conversation between Lord Yama and Nachiketa. So in this context, we see that Lord Yama presents 3 boons to Nachiketa, and as you know that the first 2 boons, first boon he asked for making sure that his father, recognizes him, is happy, and so on. The second boon is that he wanted to know the art of self-realization, meditation, and so on. And the third boon, which is an important boon, which is the kind of the core of this Upanishad, is about death. He asks Lord Yama about what happens after death. And today we're going to explore this notion of what death is, and the kind of a pre-qualification of why, how to know the truth. So in this context, we're covering this. For those who have the book, you can look at from page 47 onwards. I'm going to take you through the kind of requirements to access this knowledge in a kind of a systematic and a scientific way. So here, as I covered the last time, what Nachiketa asks in boon, in this book is that does the soul continue after death? So here he very clearly asks that when death occurs, there is always this debate whether anything, i.e. the soul, continues. And others say it is not. So he says that, can you enlighten me on this? This is the third boon that he's asking. This is Lord of Death, so he should know about death really well, right? So he wanted to ask this. And we saw in the last satsangs that how Lord Yama to give any response, but actually he was trying to distract him from asking this question. And he told him, you ask me anything else, anything, I will give it to you. So he was kind of distracting him several times, but eventually Nachiketa prevailed. And he says, no, you gave me a promise, you gave me a boon. This is the boon that I want you to answer for me. So Lord Yama was afraid, because he says then that if he was to reveal what the truth of death, he says that then you will know who I am. And so, and later on you'll see that as you go deeper why he says this. So here it is that for me, the kind of questions, from a scientific lens, is that there are 2 possibilities. The first hypothesis is that does anything continue after death? No. Some says no, nothing exists. Everything disappears the moment of death, right? And others say, yes, you continue, the soul continues, maybe the body dies, but the soul will continue. So there is this 2 contradicting view. And Nachiketa read this in the scriptures. When he spoke to different people, they were giving different meanings and different answers to this. So he was a little bit confused. And this is probably in the best position to answer this question. So he's got these 2 hypotheses, and he wants to get an answer to this hypothesis. Of course, whenever we have this, we're using a scientific lens, then we need to know to answer this question, we need to have a methodology that is quite rigorous and robust to either validate it or disvalidate it. So this is the kind of logical reasoning that this great saints who wrote this Upanishad takes us through in a very logical and scientific approach. This is where I spoke about the spiritual compass, right? The compass consists of logic and reason, and then a scientific analysis, which is unbiased in its view, because you don't want, a biased perspective because of our sensory organs or bodily experience. So this is the question that this is the hypothesis that is being tested. So which is it? Either one or the other. It cannot be both. And so then Lord Yama says, well, to answer this, you need a proper methodology, right? And in this, when he maps out this methodology to discover this, you'll see that it's actually a frame of mind that we need to have to be able to understand which of those hypotheses that is the right one, whether it's a no or whether it's a yes or whether it's something else, right? So this is the proper analysis that we call it the sankhya, the ability to analyze things, to understand the mind and prepare the mind to answer this question. So your mind and your intellect. So you need to have a systematic way of doing this, right? So to do this, he says, well, the methodology is the frame of mind. So which means that what is the state of our mind? Based on that, we'll be able to see whether we'll be able to give a proper answer to that hypothesis that is posed by Nachiketa. So Lord Yama then goes to explain, what do I mean by frame of mind? So he's now walking through that method of trying to understand, how to make sense of this question that is posed. So he says, why you have differing views of this is because of the kind of state of mind that we have. He says that there are two aspects to this. He says the good and the pleasant are two different things that most human beings are caught, and they serve different purposes, right? So as human beings, we are caught by these two different, and each is what he says is, however, a bondage. So our state of mind, to some extent, colors our view of things. And to know about that, we really need to look at the state of our mind. You see, so it says that there are two views, the two different perspective of the mind. So now he's putting that kind of like how electron microscope you look through to see what is causing the disease, or you look at the telescope to see what are the nebulas. He's now reflecting back what I call, scientists use telescope and microscope. I call it the inner scope. Inner scope is to examine the mind that is asking this question, whether something exists after death or not, right? So he's bending inwards. So he says that. So this bondage takes place in the mind. If the mind is colored, then you have one particular outlook. If it's in another way, you get a different outlook. So he says that most human beings, the mind is caught by what he calls good or, pleasant. Pleasant means prayer. That means you search for things that makes you happy, that is desires, and all those things that are material. And then you have something called Shreyas, which is goodness. And I'll define what that in more clearly, so that it gives you an idea of the frame of mind that ultimately leads you to one or the other hypothesis, or validating either one of them, or maybe both are not validated, right? And there's something else. So, so he's taking a kind of a system. So for me, it's like Lord Yama is explaining to Nachiketa in a systematic and scientific way that will, eventually he's got the methodology and the tools to answer his own question in terms of what happens after death. So he speaks about this notion that he who chooses good does to himself, but he who chooses the pleasant misses the purpose of life. This is then now he says that when you choose the pleasant, the desirable things, all those things, you actually seem to be involved in life, you're enjoying life, but you actually miss the purpose of life. And similarly, he says that when someone chooses the goodness, you see that he then discovers something, which I'll go into detail. So remember these two words called prayer and sreya. Prayer is actually that which one desires, makes you happy, fulfilling of all our material wants and needs. Whereas the Shreyas is the goodness, and the goodness is about the self and so on. So in this, you understand the purpose of life. So this brings back the question of what is the purpose of life, right? So different people have different views. So some people say, well, we are caught in a cycle of birth and death, right? And over again, we get, go through the sukha dukkhas, in our lives, the cycles, So there are some great, we are very happy, and then suddenly we come down. So he says that, so most people go through this roller coaster ride. But the true purpose of life is actually liberation from this cycle of life, right? Liberation from this, breaking away from this bondage, right? And so the framing of the mind that is caught up in this materiality will see death in a different way than the one that is liberated, right? So here he's giving a little bit of insights into the kind of answers that you get to the question depends on the state of the mind, right? So he says that, why is it that, people get caught up in the cycle? He says simple. It is actually because we do not know our own identity, who we are. And we think we are that material identity, right? And he says that that's primarily due to our ignorance, not knowing what is, who the real me is. So again, the desires will cloud the mind. The desires will get us caught in this material things that are constantly changing, and in that process, we don't know who we are. We get lost in it. So he says that, we have a particular desire, we want more and more, and this is the human nature. We have a car. You see, most people have a car, then they make a little bit more money, they buy a better car, a bigger car, and that continues, right? So rarely you see that people, maintain the car, unless if it's a vintage car, you know. But again, what he says is that, the human wants continuously increases, right? And because we're so caught up in this material world, to get to that answer becomes very difficult, right? So he says we are never happy. We always want more and more of the material things. But to answer the question of that boon three requires us to go beyond that materiality. But if we are caught in the materiality, we get clouded. So this is now answering a part of the question, why is it that people are confused? Why some say, well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. It's because of how the mind of the mind. So here he says that, we get born and born. I mean, there are different meanings to this, but more, and our wants increase. And you see that there's a continuous evolution in our mind in a material sense, right? So he says that we keep swinging between one or the other, you know. until we realize that ourself is everything. So people, the self is everything, but we get distracted, we get, clouded by the, the material nature of our lives. He says that, so we don't realize the true nature of the self. So he says that liberation follows when we know ourselves. So now, and he'll define what that self is. So if our mind is caught up with the pleasantries and the desires, we'll be caught up in this material world, and it'll be hard for us to know who we are, far less understand what happens after death. So he says that the goal of life is self-knowledge, to be able to know about the self, who we are. And he says that that is the highest good. I mean, there are many good things that we do, helping people, all those goodness. But those goodness also are trivial goodness, because sometimes people do good because they want to get something good, or they want to earn some credit so that they can go to heaven. So here he says those are all small, but that's not the ultimate goal. He says that the highest good is actually to know who you are, that self. He said that knowing of the self, the Purusha in us, the divinity in us, the big I in us, that's what he refers to as the Shreyas, not the goodness of doing good for someone and expecting good karmas and all those things. That's one thing, but that's still a desire. But he says that the goodness that he is talking about is the goodness to know the self, the spark of divinity, that divinity itself. So he says that there are some people who want nothing. So the moment the mind is enraptured by the self, you won't get caught up with this material needs. And this is what he says, that their mind is continuously enraptured by the self, or the self-knowledge. They're not interested in this material desires and experiences. So he says that that pleasantry, the prayers, is what keeps us from knowing the answer to those questions. And you'll see later on, he explains this a little bit more. So he says those who are not caught up by this pleasantry, they are intelligent, right? They're thoughtful people who shun pleasantry because they know that the pleasant is only pleasant for a short while, right? So for a momentary, for a transitory moment only, you'll be happy. But then you see you keep swinging back and forth and you want more. So it's like an addiction. Like when a drug addict takes a particular drugs, he feels high. And then he wants to get more high and more high. And you see the dosage gets higher and higher until one fine day, you see that there's an overdose. And this is what he's explaining. Most human beings are so overdosed by the materiality that ultimately it cripples them, right? So he says that this preoccupation for this, this prayers actually is what the source of our bondage. Could be finance, it could be family bonds, it could be a whole host of things that we are caught up with, right? So he says that this preoccupation of this bondage is what keeps us from knowing this truth, you know. But if we are able to liberate from it, then you start getting an illumination of the self, which will ultimately reveal the answer to the question that you're asking. He says, so the true happiness that everybody wants is the happiness that is eternal. That means knowing what happens after death, right? Is it something that have to be afraid of, or is it a black box, or what is it? So you see that, as you acquire the knowledge of the self, the answer to the question becomes more clear. So again, he explains that how, as long as you're caught up by these pleasantries, it'll be very difficult for one to know the truth, because you are caught in the ephemeral and transitory world that is continuously changing, and your experiences are continuously caught up by it, you would not be able to experience the self. Right? So again, Nachiketa says that he then Lord Yama praises him, and he says that I know you belong to the first group. The first group is actually the group that is of the Shreyas nature, which is you. Sorry, the goodness. You seem to be not succumbing to the temptation. But again, he says that I needed to make sure. So there is this wanting to see whether you truly are someone with a mindset of a Shreyas or someone who's caught up by these pleasantries of life. So he goes on to explain this. So that is why you see in the earlier part, Lord Yama tries to distract him with giving him all the pleasantries of life and the desires and so on. But he says that Nachiketa, you belong to the first group that did not get distracted by this. So here it is that so you see that what he's saying is to answer this question, to know the answer to this question, one's state of mind and intellect must be of a particular type. Right? Otherwise, it's going to be impossible. So he says that very clearly, the good and the pleasant are both open to mankind. So both the Shreyas and Preyas are open. He says that the wise ones, the Mahans and the great saints and others, prefer the good after close examining and weighing their merits and what are the pros and cons of both. So that means they are like scientists, they say, okay, if my mind is like this would be the outcome. If my mind is in this way, this would be the outcome, right? So they think very, very deeply, so that this notion of viveka, the ability to discriminate between what's real and unreal. So this is the spiritual compass that he says that you need to have that to guide you. You see? So he says that the short-sighted person often gravitate towards, the desires and the pleasantry, right? And they often want to be able to, they're concerned about increasing and preserving their physical needs and desires and so on. And you see that this is something that many people want to know what enlightenment is, what God realization is. But because they're so caught up in this material world, the material gravity is so strong that they're unable to break away to that gravity of that divinity. So the materiality is so strong, so they give excuses. Well, I can read it tomorrow, I can meditate tomorrow, I introspect tomorrow, because it's easier and so again we see that the so it's explaining that the state of mind that one needs to be able to understand what the truth is, right? So it's not something that one learns and so on, but uh, it is this. It's nothing that external you can do to acquire this knowledge. It's everything about the self development, self discovery, and the reformation of the mind, the lens of the mind. Right. So a lot of effort goes in to be able to do this. And he says that very, very few people actually are in this category of that, the pursuit of that goodness. Most people want to achieve their desires, either good health or material wealth or relationships and all those things. But very few actually wants to know who they are or what itself is, far less put in the effort to know what death is and why, what happens after death. So here he says that to Nachiketa, oh, Nachiketa, I tempted you over and over again, but you rejected everything. So you see, Lord Yama was not giving him the answer very easily. Lord Yama wanted to see, was this boy, although he seemed to be very disciplined, but he wanted to know whether he really his mind is aligned to the goodness, or the desire, searching for desires, or that search for that self. So again, he says that, in this context, he says that, uh, I tempted you with many things, but you were intelligent enough to understand that all worldly things are useless. So even though how much desire you have, it will never lead you to the answers that you are searching. What happens after that? So he said you rejected it outright, whereas most people think, oh, maybe should I or not? Should I? That's all. But he says, in Nachiketa's case, he completely dismissed it. That means he's already prepared in his mind. He says most people will actually contemplate, they'll contemplate, should I take it or not? Again, and then some majority will take it, some will still be, oh, did I make a mistake not taking it? So this is what happens in our own lives, So he says that. So it's actually about the state of our mind. The secret lies in the state of our mind. Then he goes on to explaining the kind of learnings that gives us this illumination to answer this question. He says there are two types of knowledge, right? They are both in the extreme. One is what we call secular learning, which is actually learning about contemporary things that are changing, everything that we study in the material world, from our parents to our school to our universities to our research centers, they're all secular learning. But there's also this spiritual learning, right? The learning of the universality of the existence. But even the word university comes from universality, right? And even the word individual comes from indivisible, right? So you see that most universities teach us about the material world, our universe, and so on. Very few teach actually about itself, right? So there are differences, and they have different purposes. Of course, we need to know about the secular, or what we call the contemporary knowledge, or the changes that are happening in the world. But we also need to devote time to the spiritual, or what we call eternal learning, but that which is permanent within us. So we need to know about that which is changing, including us changing, the body changing, but also that which does not change. So, so he says that, very clearly, that they have served different purposes. This is known to the great saints and sages. He says, Nachiketa, I have found that you intend on spiritual learning. He says, you're not interested in that secular learning, how much I make money, how do I fulfill my desire, my aspirations, all those things. You were aligned to that spiritual learning. And I say, I tested you with many, many things, offered you many, many kind of things, attractive things, but you were not interested in it. So, if someone else, you say, okay, Lord Yamal, say, okay, I teach you how to make money. You say, oh, okay, give me that so that I can win the next lottery and so on. But that's not how Nachiketa was. He says, no, no, no. You can keep all that. If you are the master of all illusion, you can keep all that illusion and joy. I don't want any of them. So he says that, he was more interested in knowing about what happens after death, implicitly wanting to know what is death itself. So here it brings back to the knowledge. Vidya, avidya means ignorance. So vidya, illumined, to be able to know, and avidya is the state of ignorance. He says here, when we say vidya means the knowledge, here means it's about self-knowledge, the knowledge of who we are, what we are, what is it in us that is permanent, what is it in us that is transitory. So again, to perfection. And it'll lead to the answer that you are searching. Right? So he says that which liberates, this is the knowledge that will liberate one from the Sukha Dukkha cycles, from the birth death cycles. So it's already starting to give him hints of that answer. And so again, it also reminds me of one of the quotes of my own guru, which he talks about how I outlived everything, including birth and death. I'll come to that later. So he says, this knowledge gives you discrimination, viveka. Viveka is the ability to discriminate between what is real and unreal, transitory and eternal, mortal and immortal, right? So that ability, so the frame of mind that is able to discriminate between it, like a scientist, right? And also that knowledge of vairagya. Vairagya is the ability to not be impacted by it, that self-control, right? So he says, but the avidya, which most people are caught up by, he says that, it is the opposite. You cannot discriminate between what's real and unreal, what's, desires that are permanent and transitory. There's no self-control, and, your senses run wild, right? Searching for pleasures and so on. So he says that you may know things in the material world, but you would not know the self, nor would you know about death, what happens after death. So he says that all the knowledge is about pleasure and desires. So there is no wisdom in it. So he explains. So he's now giving him that methodology to be able to, say that for you to answer this question, your mind must be of a particular quality to be able to penetrate this question, to reveal what death is and what happens in death and what remains and what, if at all anything that is remaining. So here he's explaining this knowledge of vidya and avidya. So then he goes on to explain, right? So this methodology is a methodology of framing and, recalibrating the mind inward to be able to look at oneself in much more, as what Swamiji used to say, utru tru noka noka, with intensity of like how electron microscope will have intensity of looking at the smallest, minutest thing, and the telescope that you have that intensity to look at the most faintest light that has got amazing big galaxy. In that same way, he says that, that intensity is so important to be able to penetrate the, characterization of ourself, which is the magnificent divinity that permeates everything. So it's amazing, if you telescope, the faintest light, if you look at the Hubble, oh, faint light, and he starts focusing, it's full focus, you see a huge that emerges with beauty. In the same way, you see the electron microscope, you don't see anything as it gets focused and focused, suddenly you around and in that same way, he says that, this mind that is focused inward ultimately will be able to understand the most subtlest of that experience of that self. So he says that those who are steeped in a worldly pleasure think that they're intelligent and they know about the scriptures very well. It's all theoretical, right? So they say they are blind leading the blind. So they may be very knowledgeable, right? They may be able to cite the scriptures very well, but they have never experienced it. It's all theoretical knowledge, right? So again, they're like the blind leading the blind. So, and you go round and round, when you ask them a question, what is the self? They will give you answers that are in circular that doesn't get you anywhere. But one who knows this, boom, they'll be able to tell you this is what the self is. This is what the experience is, right? So he's now, for me, it was really fascinating because the way the methodology is actually how to recalibrate the mind to go inward. So he goes on to explain that, there are worldly people too attached. He says people are very attached and they're proud of their material achievements, wealth, and the knowledge and the titles that they have, right? All that pleasantry is fantastic. They can live a comfortable life. But when death comes, all that disappears. The fear comes in because none of this will follow you. He says, you can have all, you can be a billionaire and so on, all the great things. But when death comes, you still don't have that knowledge. You have no control over it. So he says that, so material wealth doesn't give you access to that knowledge. Only the knowledge of self will give you that abundance of that divinity that rests within us. So this is what he says. So it's about that framing of the mind. So he says, who can teach you this? Right? So if I want to know about a kind of a mathematical formulation, I go to the person who knows about that formula or who has developed the formula to teach me about the formula. Similarly, if I want to be a good race driver, I go to a race driver that can teach me all the subtle things, right? So he says that if you want to know the self, then you've got to go to a bona fide teacher that has experienced that self and can clearly give you the instructions for you to get there, right? So he says that, many do not, the problem is many don't have that opportunity to God in its material sense, meeting our material needs and all those things, right? So he says that many people don't have that opportunity to know about the self. I'm sure many of you all would have maybe the learning is not deep enough, right? So he says that there are very few people who know about the self. Even among those who hear about it, they cannot grasp it, right? So number one is that many people are, and then there are some people that actually hear it. Then another group that actually has a chance to hear it, but they can't grasp it because the mind is not ready to be able to capture that. It may not be competent enough to be able to self-actualized. So again, that knowledge becomes very theoretical. So he says that, those who attain self-knowledge have to be very accomplished, which means that not just to be able to explain what that is in a simple form, but also to be able to explain that in that meditative state, how to get there, but also how to attain that while living. That means being like Nachiketa, that truth is omnipresent, though one is in that mortal body that is going through all those changes. So he says only a handful of these people exist where they have that knowledge of the self, having been taught by great people that have realized the self while the body is present. So these are the qualities of the teachers that though their body is mortal, the mind realizes that there is something that is immortal. Though the body is perishable, that something in them is who they are, which is imperishable. Though the body is finite, that which the mind has touched on is infinite. Those people exist, their existence is that infinite. They are infinite while they are in that finite world. So again, he says these are very, very small people, small numbers that can actually articulate this in a very simple way. So it goes on to explain that who is a competent teacher to teach us about the self. And in the next class, I'll talk about the qualities of those teachers that actually have that knowledge of that experiential knowledge of the self and that percolate that self knowledge in everything. And and if you know that, then you see that the answer to the question in Boon 3 becomes very clear. So in this chapter, Lord Yama takes him through the kind of framing of the mind, the recalibration of the mind to be able to answer that question. Is it hypothesis one, hypothesis two, or is it something else? So in the next class, I'll talk about the competent teacher. It is very hard to find, but there are a few things that you can see who the competent teacher is, to be able to see how one can learn from them and be mentored by them, and the kind of mindset, the serene mindset, the calm mindset, the cool mindset, the mindset, as I said, the GP Mahan qualities that they permeate, that they're always in that state of that self, even though they are in the body, even though they are in the deep sleep state, in the meditation state. So that quality of the teacher we'll talk about ultimately, and we know that quality of the teacher, you'll see that that teacher exists in all of us. The only thing is that we have chosen the wrong tutor to guide us, right? And sometimes it takes us into a different direction. So with that, I will stop. I just want to give you the illumination on how this Lord Yama, the question that is posed, how he takes in with a methodology to prepare the mind to discover the answer on its own. Sandosham.